All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for coming. And I'd like to thank Bee and Harvey and Songvi and Erica and Eastwind Books for our event today. And it's a pleasure to celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month with you all. And I would like to introduce the marvelous poet, Jason Bayani. Jason Biani is the author of Locus on Omnidawn, and his book came out last year. And he also is the author of Amulet on Right Bloody Publishing, 2013. He's an MFA graduate from St. Mary's College, a Kundiman Fellow, and works as the artistic director for Kearny Street Workshop. Yay! The oldest multidisciplinary Asian Pacific American arts organization in the country. His publishing credits include World Literature Today, Muzzle Magazine, Lantern Review, and other publications. Jason performs regularly around the country and debuted his solo theater show, Locus of Control, in 2016, with theatrical runs in San Francisco, New York, and Austin. Let's please welcome Jason.
All right.
How y'all doing? Thank y'all for having me here, and it's really great to be doing this reading with Aileen and Maw, who I really enjoy as people and as poets, and gonna be doing this for Eastwind Books. It's awesome. So I guess I'll start off with the poem I'll start off with. So it starts with a quote by Mixmaster Mike. And yeah, here's the quote. Maybe it was he's a DJ, turntablist. Yeah. Maybe it was my scratching that got those light beams to land. Maybe they're visiting, and maybe I'm actually communicating to intergalactic beings. Mixmaster Mike. To record a piece of music is to render sound into a three-dimensional shape, a vibration that moves both laterally and vertically. It is not a visual language, but a physical one. When the DJ scratches, it rewrites shape back into sound, one alien to our own ears, but a language nonetheless. Speaking to higher beings is to traverse the field. Every few weeks, I remember the Virgin Mary statue would appear on our living room mantle. They say you only pray to one God. In our house, there is a God of mercy. The one Filipino mother is called Mother, and mine shows me that to pray is ritual. Each successive Hail Mary, running my fingers across the rosary. When we speak, it is through the beads. Sometimes I build my God a tower of my many failures. Don't touch my early 20s, that there is a load-bearing wall. Maybe the reason Babel came so close to reaching the heavens was not a matter of height, but form. And they made one a shape of significant volume. We are always calling in some way to someone who will listen. All I've ever asked for is that you listen. Are you listening? Are you listening? All right. And it looks like we're going round robin with this. So next up, I wanted to introduce Maw Shein Win. Maw is a poet, editor, and educator who lives and teaches in the Bay Area. Her first full collection is Invisible Gifts poems in 2018. And Win is the first poet laureate of El Cerrito. So yeah, give it up for that. And her poetry collection, Storage Unit for the Spirit House, will be published by my publisher, Omnidawn, in fall 2020. So we're publishing housemates. Give it up for Maw.
Unmute. All right, thank you everyone. Nice to be here, and I'm going to read a couple new poems. This is called Blue Lines. Blue lines. We walk around the block, two masked bandits. Golden poppies burn our eyes. These days we count the pains, follow blue lines on charts. I ice my arthritic knees. Tea cooks for us, yellow lentils, red rice, warm squash. Take turns waking at 3 a.m. From the second floor window, I watch a woman below working in her garden, weeding, watering. Wild rose and zinnias abound. And I'm going to read another poem. Let's see. The Dome. That's not what she said. That's what I said. The ants were everywhere. In one conversation, a person speaks. The other pretends to listen. Takes place in an elevator with a velvet pillow. The ants take over City Hall. They circle the exits, fill sinks, crawl into politicians' ear canals. One by one, people stop talking and listening. The ants inch along the cool tiles into the dome hole. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Aileen. Hello, everyone. It's such an honor to be reading with Maw and Jason. Thank you, Eastwind, for organizing this event. I wish to dedicate my reading to one of my mentors, Rene Grifalda, who is the founding curator of the Asian American Pacific Islander collection at the Library of Congress. According to the Oxford Handbook of Asian American History, no other American ethnic minority groups are at the time similarly recognized. Rene's dedication, activism, and more than 5 decades of service to the Asian American community is truly unparalleled. And she's listening right now from Chicago. I'd like to read a poem I wrote for Asian Pacific American Heritage Month last year. I read it at the 10th Annual Asian Pacific American Festival at the College of San Mateo, and also at the opening of the Land of Opportunity, the Immigrant Experience at the San Mateo County History Museum. This poem was also chosen by San Francisco Poet Laureate Kim Shuk as San Francisco Public Library Poem of the Day on May 16th. This poem honors the journey of Asians in the diaspora. A short history of journey. The fault, dear Arcturus, is not in your star. I'm afraid we misread the swells, like explorers mistaking one continent for another. Columbus stretched out Asia eastward until Japan almost kissed the Azores. The Chinese treasure fleet had been mothballed long before Magellan set to sea. In other words, they were imprecise and they perished. Behold the flight of birds on rarefied air, from breeding ground to wintering ground. Behold intention and its skin precision. Be that as it may, we were always meant for motion. See how the Silk Road was paved with horses' bones, and more than smuggled silkworm, it brought sugar, silver, paper, utter world changer. See how the spice trade flourished, shoring up an empire. Its galleons, implacable bearers of a slave trade from Manila to Acapulco. The world got its cinnamon, its cocoa, its cassia and cardamom, its lapis lazuli and its balas ruby, ancient and sapphire veined. We got wanderlust. And the bravest of us looked up and remembered everything. The fixed star, the dippers, the king, the queen, the bear keeper, rubescent and fourth brightest in all the night sky, dearest. Remembered also the cardinal of old fields and every roadside, brilliantly blue and sometimes true, in the same night sky, roaming its way home. Thank you. Our next reader is Jason.
All right, thank you. I want to read this piece. I'm gonna do two pieces. I wanted to take my own stab at the, I think a lot of poets like to remake the creation myths, and I decided to do one myself. So, starts with a quote by Nick Joaquin. The world was always going to be remade by people who were too busy to remake themselves first, and who left the world twice as miserable as before. Nick Joaquin. It was said that in the beginning there was only the sea and the sky, not a spot of land, and only the flying animals living between. And the waters were quiet, and the skies were always still, and yet everything moves around them. And there must be something that moves them too. When we become aware of our wants, isn't it then that we understand we are helpless to time, as all things must be? And this is what stirs the water, and this is how the sky becomes wind. And when the wind was shook, it learned to thunder, and then the sea and the sky became all of their wants awakening. How even the sky can deliver water, even the water can bear the fire, and this is what makes the land. This is how the gods love, and when the land woke, they whispered to it the rain, and it has never stopped falling. In time, the wind above the land and the wind above the sea gave birth to the bamboo, and the bamboo was strong and it was beautiful. And then because it is both of these, it split itself in two, and we walked out believing we can only be one or the other, that we are either strength or beauty, not that the plant would cleave itself because it believed we too should be both. In another version of the myth, intercolonial revisionism, the first man and the first woman give birth to many children, a trait commonly attributed to the poor and uneducated. They become unruly over time. The Filipino, as unruly, uneducated, and savage, justifies their subjection to a more advanced culture. And in his frustration, the first man begins to beat them, normalization of patriarchal violence. And they scatter in hiding. Those who find the well-hidden rooms in the house are the ones who become the leaders. Those who have hidden in the walls, the slaves. Establishment of caste systems is in great order. The ones who hid in the fireplace turn dark and eventually retreat to the jungle, othering and disenfranchisement of indigenous cultures. And the ones who escape the house, they are the free men who come back as the white explorers. Glorification of whiteness, reframing the conqueror as savior. The first inhabitants of the Philippines are likely the ancestors of the Eta people, likely to be the Austronesian seafarers, which gives them a shared lineage with the Aborigines in Australia and the inhabitants of several islands in the Pacific, including Fiji and Vanuatu, among others. Because the Eta had lived in the mountains, they were untouched by Spanish colonization and been able to preserve their customs and their culture, and this begins to remove them from the Filipino identity. When they lose their homes, because untouched people live in untouched areas that are filled with resources, it's easier to believe this is happening somewhere else. When they start dying, it becomes easier to see it happening to someone else. What a shame, someone might think. Them, that's who the dying happens to, them. Though where they reside is within the borders you believe you live in. There, inside, are other borders. And as Anzaldúa says, borders are set up to define the places that are safe and unsafe, to distinguish us from them. They say when you look up in the sky, you're not only seeing all of the universe, but all of time as well. The moon marks 1 second behind, Mars 8 minutes, Saturn 49. Every light is another year past, proceeding to 13.8 billion. I understand best where I am in the context of a sun and its orbiting planets, less so within a galaxy, even less within a cluster. I was born a Christian, so for me, time starts at year 0. And everything before then is another solar system, another galaxy. The oldest human bones discovered date back to 2.8 million years. When I wrote this poem, the oldest found in the Philippines was 67,000. The first city, 7,400. All of it dwarfing this stretch of time to which I am adhered. All of it, another light in the sky. I had to mend that last part because after I wrote the poem, there was another discovery of older bones. So, but it was already published. So. I'm gonna do one more little short poem here. On Tatang's farm, he grabs a bucket of water and heads to the outhouse at midnight. The tread of his footsteps slapping the bucket's fill against the insides. The weight sways, curling back into its container. Maybe one of his sons wakes up, even the subtlest of sounds of violent disruption in all this perfect quiet. My father's not here. Only the boys who are old and strong enough are needed, and there isn't enough to feed them all. The last boy will go to school. The last boy will live with his aunt who has enough to make sure he's fed. This is how you start an education, how you learn to live without attachments, what you will need to know to leave the country where you were born. My grandfather trudges along the night. An errant drop flies out the backswing and lands on the dirt, taking with it only a small container of the moon. This drop, once whole, once familiar, having to learn to be something new. And maybe it thinks, how will I recognize myself? Who will I be this far away from where I was whole? I think Maw's next.
All right. Fantastic, Jason. Thank you. All right. Read a couple poems. I'd like to read some poems from Invisible Gifts, my book on Manic D Press. And this first one is called The Wheelchair. The wheelchair. The scar is a girl, and the wheelchair is a woman. The crutch is butch. The drugs are good. The light is dry. The air is paint. The bed isn't there. The nurse wears a cape, and the doctor is a boy. The wheelchair is there. The scar is at a loss. The wheel catches light off the reflection of water in a bag. The bag is on a pole. The walker is a doctor in blue pants. The scar cream isn't there. The air is blue paint. The light is a small girl with her face in the pillow. The crutch is a doctor with a diamond on her forehead. The diamond is a tunnel with a one-way road. The ambulance drives towards the east. The bed is dry paint, and the scar rejects the water. The bag leaks a trickle of tiny blue diamonds. Stray cakes. Silvery rivulets on skin and pins and nettles. Snippets of sinking, singular she shivers and slivers. Stray cakes, unwashed glasses. She glances at maps of France. The rest of the body was warm, covered in many blankets. The cold wind came through the window, made her head cold. The rest of the body was warm. Watery ferns, an optical ending, the optical beginning. And this poem is in remembrance of my sister Titipo, who passed away 4 years ago this month. Oars, elegy for sister. Rowboat, shadow falls across bright eye. Finger glides down, river, shaded by shadow slim arms, bright fingers, trail waters long gone. Shades drawn up, light bright against the eye. Arm trails round along river below. The water bright up close. And let's see, and my last poem for this round I'm going to read this one. In the wetlands, otter and mink roam the fen. I wear a vest of moss. Cormorants and curlew sound from the bog. I avoid the beehive. Sea trout and croaker move through a saltwater swamp. I consult my mood ring. How will I feel? Sedges and saltbush, the bobcats are disappearing. I cry at all the right times. Thank you.
Thank you, Ma. That was beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Before I read my next poem, I'd like to share a little backstory. One time, this was over a decade ago, my husband, whom I was still dating at the time, was making dinner. And I came up to him and I asked, "What is your viand?" And he looked at me blankly. So I felt I had to explain. Viand was a word we used a lot in school when I was growing up in Manila, because we were not allowed to say its Tagalog equivalent. And in fact, we were fined 10 cents for every Tagalog word we spoke. And this poem is about that experience. And by the way, I also wanted to share, because I've mentioned my husband, Paul and I actually officially became a couple at Eastwind. This was over 10 years ago. It was during a reading featuring Aileen Cassinetto. So Eastwind will always be very special for the both of us. And the poem is titled Viand. At her Shishi Manila school, she was forbidden to speak, think in Filipino. So at lunchtime, eager to share her ulam, she would ask hesitantly, "What is your viand?" "Viand," her husband murmurs. "Viand," she repeats more emphatically. That was what we called the dishes we ate with rice when I was in 3rd grade. Viand, her husband laughs, not having encountered the word before and on whom language was never forced and consequently never rested. It sounds more like a D&D character. This next poem is another another attempt to honor Asian American history. Dust. Sometimes we're like monsoon winds shifting east of where home is. Sometimes we're like tea leaves, heavenly and unfurling in agony. This is how we shape the earth. Dust up the springs and autumns. See where it rained, which map bore our shade, and which palace to place above us, where our majesty raised a dust. Thank you, and back to Jason.
That's great. Thank you. Let's see. I have these 2 pieces at the end of my book I wanted to kind of read together. I think a lot of me being able to write about, culture, my culture, me being able to write about my experiences as Filipino is to be able, I think a lot of that comes from me trying to explore what loss and grief means in my life. And yeah, so I'll just read this piece. It's a little prose piece, and then I have a poem that follows it. I found a Betamax videotape a little while back that had my 7th birthday recorded on it. It's an hour of me and my cousins playing in the backyard. I took it to the shop in the city to get transferred to file, but the tape was so old we couldn't get the sound to encrypt right. It's a silent movie now, a meditation on the purity of play, a kinetic study, a glimpse of what it might look like to live without the context of the world, its history and present realities. It is what I imagine what free could be. It's hard adjusting, seeing all of us getting older. In a lot of ways, I'm still there on that tape. I'm still running with my cousins. A while ago, we buried the youngest one of us. I don't think any of us could make sense that the first of us to go would be the last of us born in this country. My cousin's husband gets on the mic during the funeral and he says that there's no way around this, that this one hurts. And he says, grief is the price we pay for love. I look at this body of grief and for once I choose to pay. I'm not afraid of my sadness or the cruel limits of the American imagination, which regards me less as alive but within a perpetual state of dying. This body has always been an extraordinary gate of departure. I'm made whole by all that leaves, but never truly leaves. I'm made a living thing. How little there is to know of the body, that we would emerge from the water, never complete new. There inside is a facsimile of older grief. They say that the body inherits memory. Maybe it's just the newer pain learning to understand us through us. Trauma is a wire through the generation. We're not alone in this, I repeat, then inhale each new flush of air, mapping out the parts of me that remain hidden. We are not alone in this. I have to tell myself that this too is a practice in faith. On the day the mortician holds my heart in his hand, what do we call it? Out of commission parts, the collapsed engine. What becomes of the well of ideas, the great imagination, every bit of touch that ignites and remains still? Where does this go? I want to believe joy is inherited too. Wouldn't they want us to have this as well? Doesn't everyone you love deserve the entirety of you? Someday I will be gone from here, and someday you will too. I grieve for you already. But I believe grief is an honest gift. It's how you learn to hold the whole of a person. So much of loss is counted inside of the absence. There's nothing missing when it comes to any of you. It is your fullness that overwhelms me. The rich and varied life of a person, all of its requisite pleasures and madnesses. Maybe we learn how to live with this. Maybe we make the world that understands how to love us in our pain in equal measures. In there is a greater joy. I have to believe it is one equal to the weight of our living. Thank you.
Thank you, Jason. Now we'll take it over to Maw. Oh no, to Aileen.
Oh,
Right.
I'd like to read an excerpt from The Pink House of Purple Yam Preserves. It's a fictional prose piece, which is based on a real wedding in the Philippines when I was growing up, but I feel that I need to read this disclaimer. Any resemblance to events in the Philippines prior to the People Power Revolution in 1986 is purely coincidental. The only other time I read this was at the Filipino-American International Book Festival in San Francisco last year. Allowing for inflation, the wedding cost the taxpayers an estimated $30 million. This is evidently a country where parents loved their children fiercely. The poor sold their blood to hospitals to buy food for their kids. And the wealthy, remember the bride's sister? Well, a few years ago, her parents bought an 18th century Princeton estate so that she could attend college more comfortably. If that's not love, what is? This is also a country where 1 in every 400 women worked as a prostitute. Most will never live to be a bride. Years from now, The bride in the story will have the unfortunate torchères restored, for such is the way of the wealthy. They gentrify and they bring back the former things. Her mother, in the way of iron butterflies, will forever demand what she thinks is due her children. Tomorrow is Sunday, the 12th, Independence Day in a country that is still very much under military rule. Today's deeds are done, but there is a great deal to do around the house, for it is an old house and requires much care. Already, my purple yam vines seem to be overtaking the whole place. I need to prune them back, burn the bulbils. Soon, I will need to replant more tubers, grow them, gather them in. My purple yam looks even more vibrant in this light. This golden hour, just before sundown, makes everything a little clearer, less dispersed, unfading. And so we are emboldened. What extraordinary deeds shall we accomplish tomorrow? On this day, the year of our Lord, 1983, no hero has yet fallen. No young women have yet been hanged. We are not yet exiled. And that which we make may still endure. Thank you, and back to you, Maw.
That was powerful. Thank you. Thank you, Aileen. I'm going to end with a few poems from, hang on a second, round 3, from Storage Unit for the Spirit House, which will be coming out in October, and I'm really excited about it. I want to say a little bit about the book. I started writing about storage units, hence the title, and different forms of containers. And then I started thinking about the spirit houses I had seen, during my visits to Burma and as well as Thailand. And Nats are Burmese animist spirits, so that might help understand a couple of the poems. The first one is called Spirit House 5. As a child, I did not climb trees. Instead, I gathered leaves that flew to the ground. The elms were tall in the fall, the neighbor boys cruel. One left a dead kitten in a box on the doorstep. I made homes among the leaves, safety in gold, yellow, brown. Invented a family who lived in a treehouse. Green twig, the mother. Broken branch, the father. 2 ferns, the missing sisters. And this is called Sky Space 3. A limited edition, annotated records for the researchers, referred to footnotes about the survivors, how they lived, how they moved, how they breathed. Opened door and let sky inside. And this is one of my storage unit poems, Storage Unit 202. The rental faces another house. When she arrives, there are wild turkeys in the street. It begins to rain. The storage unit in El Cerrito holds pinned moths in cases, brass castanets, tin pants, a box of cork buttons. She swims laps in the thunderstorm. And this was just recently published in Mekong Review, and this is called Spirit House 4. Sibling follows sibling into thorn forest. Girl holds stick of incense, tip aglow. 37 knots await atop Mount Popa. Volcanic relics, sister brother, blue-throated barbets, lightning clue, a nest lands on soft earth, entwined vines, distant blaze, a candle wick floating in a bowl of oil. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ma, and Aileen and Jason for all your beautiful poetry. I just wanted to take this little pause to say hello and welcome to everyone. And sorry about the tech difficulties in the beginning, but thank you so much for your patience. I'm Sangvi and I'm part of staff at Eastwind Books. Thank you so much everyone for joining us today. A little bit about Eastwind Books. We're a community bookstore in downtown Berkeley. We specialize in Asian American ethnic studies literature. And usually we'd have a lot of events like this in our store, but obviously because of our situation right now, we're seeing all these boxes on Zoom, which is also lovely. But I know, speaking of that, in that note, our poets have also prepared some pandemic-related poems. So if they're ready to share those, we can go ahead and start with those poems. So if either Aileen or Ma would like to share theirs first, we can do that. Okay, Ma, can go.
I said, Aileen. Yeah,
Okay.
Sure. Okay, so speaking of Aileen, Aileen put out a call for pandemic poems for her journal, My Gozine, the shelter issue, and this is what I wrote. Quiver fern. We venture through tunnels under the city. Wear faux fur coats and felt gloves to fend off damp. We manage to survive. Small ferns sleep underfoot. We burn candles to read maps, fear air and skin, hide bottles of vodka under subway tracks. Children quiver in pink, muddy boots. We share found fruit and tubs of butter. We think this may end. We wrap black masks around our mouths. Sirens sound from above. Thanks.
Thank you, Ma. I've always loved that poem. Thank you. My poem was actually prompted by a writing exercise with Ma. We chose a word each around which we wrote a poem. And this was what came out from my exercise. Touch me not, from holy texts, is a hint to go and tarry not, which also alludes to a medieval imbalance of black bile. I know it as the social cancer which has plagued my people. But an archipelago can have many homonyms steeped in legend. Once there was a girl who turned into a shrub, wild and spined, fern-like, whose leaves quiver and fold when touched. This is the simplest form of learning, a countermeasure, instinctive and passive. Indeed, touch is the first sense we acquire. And here in the West, where I now live, we follow a 2,000-year-old custom. We offer a handshake to show we carry no weapon and come in peace. But a pandemic disrupts offerings, finds a nation as it is, not as its citizens wish it to be. To disrupt its path and flatten the curve, we follow recommendations for social distancing, a community-wide isolation. How fortunate then that we've been primed to communicate in real time. Hope you are well and thank you kindly. But if we should meet unexpectedly, in all honesty, hand over heart, I will unfold slowly, pretend all danger has passed. Jason?
We go another round?
It's a pandemic, to read your pandemic poem.
I was not able to come up with something, but I did have, I've been having some trouble writing lately, but I do have a little something that I felt, you know, kind of worked within. eh, um, when the world comes to a still, it is a barely noticeable microsecond. What people say is, it felt as if my heart stopped. And that is an appropriate metaphor. The life of you stops for a moment, misses the silent cut, a gentle wounding that happens over and over again. When something explodes, wherever you are is in the vicinity. If you're not dead, you were for only a sliver of time. This is enough to change everything. And there you name your new colors, buckled concrete, a terrible red. This thing I cannot say, but will stay with me the rest of my life. Somewhere else, there is someone saying this is happening somewhere else, who has become so accustomed to a busy street or busy sky that true quiet is the disruption. Imagine our cities in utter silence. Imagine what the sound becomes inside of it. There are two entirely different places where fear and terror live. One is imagined, and the other is lived in excruciating detail. You're not complicit in your own destruction. It is fed to you in a room with no mirrors, a quiet room where you can't even hear the sound of your own breath. These things, they move through time, and we act as if nothing can be done but to ask the next generation to save us from ourselves. I do not know what it looks like when we win, but I'm trying to ask the question. Somewhere inside all this noise is a proper quiet. I know this. I can't stop hearing it. It shakes all the comfort out of me.
Great. Wow. Thank you to our three poets for your pandemic reflections. I thought it really hit home to where we are. So thank you so much for sharing. And now, let's see if I can. We're going to move into our conversation portion of our program today. So we have a few questions prepared for the poets, but if anyone in our audience has any questions you'd like to ask, feel free to type that into the chat and we'll get to those as well if we have time today. So our first question is, what is something about your identity that is really important to you? So for any of our poets, you can take some time to answer.
I can go first. First is that I identify as a Filipino diasporic poet, which means that my work will always be rooted in Philippine historical and post-colonial contexts. The fact that I'm here writing poetry in my second language and appointed to one of the most honored posts a poet can ask for, despite being foreign born and naturalized and fated to forever wrestle with articulation. It's not so much a story of success, but a story of struggle and surviving the odds because of the generosity of others. Secondly, though I don't share the history and cultural references of second and third generation Asian Americans, my sense of community tells me that we are bound by commonalities such as our sense of interdependence and collectivism. And this is why I think, though I'm Filipino, when I watch a Bollywood film or go to Japantown or Chinatown or the Vietnamese market, I always feel this sense of the familiar, a sense of coming home and belonging, which is really the common theme in my current body of work.
Great, thank you, Aileen.
Um,
Ma, did you have anything?
Sure, I have. So I appreciated that question. And you know what, when I think about my identity, the first thing that comes to my mind is thinking about my family. My parents emigrated from Burma in the early 60s. And, you know, similar to the path of many immigrants, it was a difficult journey. And, you know, I know that both my parents and, you know, many other, you know, immigrants have suffered, you know, kind of trauma that is carried to, you know, other generations. And so I feel that part of what I write about is exploring those traumas that are carried down. And in Storage Unit for the Spirit House, I write about Nats, which I mentioned, and it just made me think about, you know, the different homes that, you know, my family and I moved from city to city and state to state. And I feel that I'm always excited when I meet someone who has Burmese heritage. I, you know, grew up in towns where there were like hardly any, you know, Asian kids. And, you know, as moving to the Bay Area was wonderful because I felt like I, you know, was able to meet, you know, Burmese writers, Kenneth Wong, who happens to be here today. And yeah, so I feel that, you know, my heritage has made itself and has entered my work and my poetry. And yeah, that's what I'd like to say.
Yeah, I think one of the things I've come to value most about my identity over time, you know, it's just one of the things, but I think I've, you know, and I think more a lot of it has to do is because of the kind of I took a lot, you know, of just kind of for the dark, you know, I mean, being dark skinned in more culture was, I took a lot for that. And, you know, I think there was, you know, the comments and also just kind of the attitudes and the ways that people would talk to me, the ways that people would, you know, comment on my skin growing up could be very violent and demeaning. And it took me a long time to learn how to love, you know, the darkness of my skin and to find the value in it. And I think that's why, you know, to be able to be at that point today means a lot.
Okay. All right, thank you. Also, as a reminder for our audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. But we'll move on to our next question, which is, can you tell us a little bit about your creative process? I always love this question to hear from creatives. But Ma, would you like to start with that one?
Let's unmute myself. All right. Well, the first thing I'd like to say, I am most definitely a collaborator. I am inspired by visual artists and musicians and dancers, and I just enjoy the process of working on creative projects together with you know, other artists and other writers. You know, I recently did a project with Sarah Stone and Ron Nyron, Evan Karp, and we were inspired by the art of Sylvia Fine, who had a show at BAMFA. And the three of us wrote 100-word pieces inspired by her paintings, and Evan created the music for it, and it just was such a fun collaboration together. And one of the things I'm doing as well is I'm doing a lot of collaborative pieces with four different groups of people right now, where we just, of course, because we're all at home, writing back and forth, sharing words, similar to what Aileen and I did for the two words quiver and fern. And so, you know, writing, as we know, is such a solo process, but I feel that you know, there's space to work with others, and that's a big part of my creative process. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ma.
For me, poetry is the way I communicate with the world around me. And the first rule in poetry is to pay attention, because what sets a poet apart is the ability to see things differently. The next thing I do is I gather the raw material for my poem. I do a lot of research. I read a lot. I read journals. I try to take complex ideas and distill them into simple lines. Also, when I write poems about places I've called home at one point, I ask myself, what is it about that place that tore me? What gave it its shape and spine? Where is its rhythm? So that by the time I'm ready to write, I've already mapped my poem through the lens of history and identity. Thank you.
Yeah, no real kind of thing to it. I work when I can. You know, I think, you know, for a lot of us, a lot of us who are poets, we have to work our jobs and stuff, and like, so, you know, it's kind of like write when you can, right? Carve out space where you can carve space, and you know, things come together. I mean, I know for myself though, like I don't like just doing one thing. I think engaging in other art forms kind of helps open up other things for me, and you know, that's kind of you know, how I go about it.
Awesome, thanks. I definitely feel that as a fellow creative, you kind of just have to fit it in, unfortunately. You kind of have to fit it in wherever it fits in your schedule. But yeah, but sometimes that's the beauty of it too. So let's see. Okay, we do have a question from Kenneth for our poets, which is actually kind of related to our next question as well. It's, does the current involuntary isolation, is it helpful or harmful to your creativity?
Well, that's a good question. I could answer that. So, well, can I just be honest and say I miss seeing people? But, so one of the things that has been a little bit of a challenge is that I'm online all the time now for my job, and so a lot more than I used to be. So it's been a bit of a challenge to stay engaged in, you know, my, you know, creative process during shelter in place. And so, you know, I've had to, you know, just really try to create time. As Jason was saying, it's, you know, we're poets and we're working full time, and to make time to write. But of course, because, you know, we can't meet in person, I feel very fortunate. I'm in writing groups, and so we meet once a month, and that's been really helpful. Yay, shout out to my writing groups. And I also have writing dates and deadlines with a few writing friends, and that kind of helps me stay focused. And I put it in my calendar and just know in the back of my mind, like, I'm going to try to write a new poem in 2 weeks, and I'll send it to a friend. And it's not even like we critique each other, it's just a way of holding each other accountable for writing. And so I would recommend that. But it's I guess it's been a mixed bag, but I feel fortunate in that I have still been able to write during this time. Maybe less, but thanks.
Perfect.
My work schedule hasn't really changed since I've been home. I still have to find blocks of time where I can do some writing or publishing or community event organizing as Poet Laureate of San Mateo County. But to be honest, I haven't been able to write a poem during the shelter in place. However, because classes have been moved online, I was able to schedule classroom visits with grade school and high school students, something I was not able to do before. I was also able to curate a community poem to channel people's creativity and generosity by raising funds for the county hospital. And that's it.
And I know, thank you, Aileen.
Yeah.
I know you also, had another similar question about being engaged during this time. So go ahead.
Okay. I was gonna, answer that. Before I had, when I had turned in the manuscript from my last book, afterwards I was like, I don't think I want to write for a while. And I was like, okay with giving myself the space to not write. And, it had been a good year when Shelter in Place started. And so it was kind of like, I guess I'm still not writing. But when Shelter in Place started, I felt kind of discouraged, I feel like, from doing anything creative. Because I even I even stopped practicing, I even stopped getting on, my DJ equipment and mixing and everything. And I really didn't want to do anything, but I have read a lot more than I have in ever, I think. And I've been thinking a lot about, kind of my what I feel like, my kind of core tenets are as a poet, and what I feel, I can maybe possibly teach is, I've been thinking a lot about going back into teaching and what kind of curriculum I want to build around that. So.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason, and our poets. I think we have time for one more question. So this question, it's a comment and a question. I love the unique interpretations and reclamations of myth in your poetry. What are some challenges you face with transforming history into contemporary critiques and the expansions of inequality and survival and justice? That was a long question, so. Maybe Aileen, would you like to start?
Sure. So because I write from cultural memory, sometimes memory is not always accurate. I'm what Filipinos would call a martial law baby because I was born and raised during martial law in the Philippines. And that already speaks volumes because it means I grew up being taught that every word could be deemed political and volatile. So I felt like I never really had a voice until poetry came along. I grew up filing away memories and impressions, which I was able to use in later poems. Actually, several years ago, I wrote an essay to map my growth as a writer, and I think this sums up my experience as a poet in America, and I'd like to share it with you. If a poet is measured by her meters, does she mark out the ground where she broke her stride? The miles I've logged to get here are strewn with poetic intentions. I came to America with a luggage overpacked with poems, and at San Francisco airport, I collapsed my images into one overwhelming thought. I could be a poet here. But one thing I learned about poetry and America is that they are both not for the faint-hearted. Thank you.
Great.
I love that. Thank you, Aileen. It was inspiring. You know, I was born in the U.S. and I saw that one of the questions, I think Larry asked the question, how multilingual affect your poetry? You know, so my parents, having come here in the early 60s, you know, just, you know, the melting pot was kind of the, you know, the aura of the time. And basically, I did not learn Burmese. I think my parents wanted all of us, the children born in the US, to, you know, fit in. And so when they spoke to us in English. And so, alas, I do not speak Burmese, but one of these days I'm going to take a Burmese class and a Burmese language class. But to address the question of mythologies, that's what was so fascinating for me to work on the book that's coming out for Omnidawn. I read a lot of papers and scholarship on Nat worship, and it just, I don't know, it just kind of opened my mind and my eyes to Burmese mythologies and beliefs, and you know, I feel compelled to continue this search for, you know, thinking about these mythologies and how it can be translated into my poetry. So, Jason?
I mean, I try to be as careful as I can when, you know, approaching this, because, you know, I have to, you know, come in fully understanding, you know. I don't know if I'm always successful. I have to come in fully understanding that my lens is that of an American-born Filipino, you know, and that I have a certain, you know, that I have certain limitations in being able to interpret, you know, meaning. And so I think in the particular piece I read, I think, you know, my need to respond came from looking at, you know, how the myth was changed by, you know, kind of how the myth was changed by, you know, by colonialism, and you know, to be able to go back again and to try to maybe undermine that. But I mean, I have to also fully acknowledge like where my lens exists and what I'm speaking through. And you know, I can only hope that like I'm trying to do it is trying to do it with the appropriate amount of justice to it.
Great. Thank you, Jason. And thank you to our poets for answering those questions. Hopefully, we got a little more of a sense of how their creative process works and what they're thinking of as they write. But I think that's all we have. Those are all the questions we have time for today. I wanted to say another extra special thank you to Maw, Aileen, and Jason for helping us and sharing your poetry today. Let's see. So thank you everyone for joining us. If you enjoyed the poetry today and would like to check out some of our poets' books, you can find them at asiabookcenter.com. I'll share a slide with you with more information on that. Let's see. So there's some information where you can purchase the books. But yes, thank you again, everyone. We hope you enjoyed your time today. And we hope to see you at our next event, whether that be online on Zoom or at our store, hopefully in the future. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eastwind. Thank you, B. Thank you, Harvey. Thank you, Sungbi. Yay.
Thank you, Jason.